The ballroom had emptied hours ago, crystal chandeliers casting long shadows across abandoned champagne flutes and wilted centerpieces. Valerie Lancaster sat alone at the bar, her tailored Armani suit a stark contrast to her unraveling composure. Mascara traced dark rivers down her porcelain cheeks. The woman who commanded billion-dollar mergers with a single word now trembled, fingers white-knuckled or around a glass she couldn't seem to lift or set down. Owen Carter watched from the doorway, the mailroom clerk invisible to everyone who mattered in this world of power and privilege. He could slip away unnoticed. He always did. But something in the way her shoulders collapsed inward made him stay. He crossed the marble floor, each footstep echoing in the silence, and placed a napkin beside her. She turned, eyes drowning in desperation and alcohol, and words spilled out between broken sobs. "I want a baby. Can you help?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Owen's breath caught. His mind stuttered. Then he heard his own voice, confused and raw. "I'm going to be a father?" The city lights beyond the windows blurred into stars, and neither of them understood that this single moment would shatter every wall they'd built around their damaged hearts. Owen had seen Valerie Lancaster 100 times in the hallways of Lancaster Industries, always moving like a force of nature, assistants scrambling in her wake. She never looked at people like him. The mailroom existed in a different universe from the executive floors, separated by 30 stories and an ocean of class distinction. But tonight, stripped of her armor of confidence and control, she looked terrifyingly human. Her hand reached out and gripped his sleeve with surprising strength. The words kept tumbling out, raw and unfiltered by the barriers she usually maintained. She spoke of emptiness, time running out, and a longing so fierce it had carved out everything inside her. Owen didn't understand half of what she said, but he understood pain. He knew what it meant to be alone in a crowded room, to smile while your heart bled in silence. He helped her stand, her legs unsteady beneath expensive heels. The valet had long since gone home, and Owen's old sedan sat alone in the parking garage, looking apologetic next to the luxury vehicles that remained. Valerie leaned against him, her perfume expensive and her breathing shallow. She gave him an address in the penthouse district, a zip code that might as well have been another country. The drive took time through streets slick with rain that had started to fall. She talked the entire way, her words slurring, but her meaning crystallizing with painful clarity. She wanted a child before it was too late. She wanted to hold something real in her arms. She wanted to matter to someone in a way that had nothing to do with stock prices or quarterly reports. Owen pulled up to a building so tall its top disappeared into low-hanging clouds. A doorman appeared, recognition flickering across his face before settling into professional neutrality. Owen supported Valerie through a lobby of marble and gold into an elevator with mirrors that reflected their mismatched pair from every angle. She fumbled with her keycard, and when the door finally opened, Owen stepped into a world he'd only seen in magazines. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, spread out like scattered diamonds. Furniture that probably cost more than his annual salary sat arranged in perfect, untouched elegance. But what struck Owen most was how cold it felt, how empty despite its grandeur. Not a single photograph marked these walls. No personal touches softened the designer precision. It wasn't a home. It was a showroom for a life unlived. Valerie pulled him inside, and the door clicked shut behind them with a finality that made Owen's pulse quicken. She turned to face him, tears still wet on her cheeks, but something determined hardening in her gaze. She asked him again, clearer this time despite the alcohol, whether he would help her, whether he understood what she was asking. Owen should have left, should have called her assistant or a friend or anyone who belonged in this world. But he looked at this woman who had everything money could buy and nothing that mattered, and he saw himself years ago standing in a hospital room holding a newborn daughter while his wife's lawyer served him divorce papers. He remembered that desperate, drowning feeling of being utterly alone at life's most crucial moment. He stayed. The night unfolded in fractured moments that Owen would later struggle to piece together. Valerie's hands on his face, her lips tasting of champagne and salt, the shocking warmth of her skin against his, the way she whispered, "Please," like a prayer, like he was saving her instead of crossing every professional and personal boundary he possessed. They moved through her pristine apartment, leaving a trail of discarded clothing and abandoned inhibitions. In her bedroom, with the city lights painting patterns across white sheets, Owen forgot about consequences. He forgot about the impossible distance between their worlds. He forgot everything except the woman in his arms, who needed him in a way no one had needed him in years. When it was over, she fell asleep with her head on his chest, and Owen stared at the ceiling, wondering what he'd just done. Morning came too quickly, sunlight cruel and unforgiving. Owen woke to find Valerie already awake, sitting at the edge of the bed wrapped in a silk robe, her back rigid with tension. The woman from last night had vanished, replaced by someone who looked carved from ice. She didn't turn around when she spoke, her voice flat and businesslike. She informed him that her driver would take him home, that this incident would remain confidential, that he needn't worry about his employment. Each word landed like a small cut. Owen dressed in silence, gathering his scattered clothes, feeling the weight of shame and confusion settling on his shoulders. He paused at her bedroom door, wanting to say something, though he didn't know what. But Valerie kept her gaze fixed on the windows, and Owen understood dismissal when he saw it. He let himself out. The week that followed felt surreal, like he'd dreamed the entire encounter. Owen returned to his routine of sorting mail and pushing carts through fluorescent-lit corridors, invisible once again. He caught glimpses of Valerie twice, both times from a distance, as she swept through the lobby, surrounded by executives. She didn't look his direction. Harper asked him why he seemed sad, and Owen couldn't explain to his 6-year-old daughter that he'd made a mistake he couldn't quite regret. He'd held something beautiful and broken for one night, and now his regular life felt somehow smaller. He told Harper he was just tired and made her favorite dinner, mac and cheese with the shape she liked. They read 3 bedtime stories instead of the usual 2, and Owen held her a little tighter, grateful for this one perfect thing in his life. On Friday afternoon, Owen's supervisor called him into the cramped office that smelled of old coffee and disappointment. For one terrifying moment, Owen thought this was it, that Valerie had reported him, that he'd be fired and blacklisted and unable to provide for Harper. But his supervisor just handed him a slip of paper with a room number on the executive floor. Miss Lancaster had requested mailroom services. The words felt like code. Owen took the elevator up, his heart hammering against his ribs. The executive floor was hushed and immaculate, all glass walls and modern art. Valerie's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia, directed him to wait in a small conference room. Time passed before Valerie appeared. She looked different in the harsh light of day and sobriety, her hair pulled back severely, her suit a deep navy that made her seem untouchable. She sat across from him, placing a folder on the table between them but not opening it. When she finally spoke, her voice carried none of last week's desperation. She asked him directly whether he remembered what happened. Owen nodded, unable to find words. Valerie's jaw tightened. She told him she didn't make a habit of such behavior, that the alcohol and stress had compromised her judgment, but that they needed to discuss the potential consequences like adults. Owen felt his face burn. He started to apologize, but she cut him off with a raised hand. She wanted to know if he'd been sincere, if in the impossible event that she was pregnant, he'd meant what he'd said in that ballroom. Owen's mouth went dry. He thought about Harper, about single parenthood, about the weight of responsibility that had crushed him and remade him into someone stronger. He thought about Valerie's empty penthouse and the loneliness that echoed in every perfect room. He met her gaze and told her the truth. If she was pregnant, if she wanted to keep the child, then yes, he'd meant it. He'd be a father to that child, as impossible and terrifying as that sounded. Valerie's carefully controlled expression cracked just slightly. She asked, why? Why would someone in his position take on such a burden, such a complication? Owen thought of Harper's laugh, of goodnight kisses and crayon drawings on the refrigerator, of every small moment that made his hard life worth living. He told Valerie that children weren't burdens. They were the only things that truly mattered. Something shifted in Valerie's face. She opened the folder and pushed a document across the table, some kind of agreement her lawyers had drafted, full of legal language about parental rights and financial arrangements. But she didn't push him to sign. Instead, she asked about his daughter. What was her name? How old? What did she like? Owen found himself talking about Harper, about her obsession with dinosaurs and her fear of thunderstorms, and the way she still held his hand when they crossed the street. Valerie listened with an intensity that surprised him, asking questions that revealed genuine interest rather than polite obligation. They talked for over an hour, the legal document forgotten, two people discovering each other as humans rather than archetypes. When Owen finally left, Valerie asked him to wait before signing anything. She wanted to think. Owen agreed, and for the first time since that night, they exchanged something that almost resembled a smile. Weeks later, Valerie requested another meeting. This time, she came to the mailroom during Owen's lunch break, causing heads to turn and whispers to ripple through the workspace. She wore less armor today, a simple blouse and slacks, her hair down around her shoulders. She asked if they could talk somewhere private. Owen led her to the loading dock where he sometimes ate his sandwich, a concrete space that smelled of cardboard and exhaust, but offered solitude. Valerie stood there looking utterly out of place and yet somehow more real than she'd ever appeared in her natural habitat. She told him she'd taken a test that morning. She was pregnant. The words hung between them, enormous and life-changing. Owen's first thought was of Harper, of how he'd explain this to his daughter. His second thought was of Valerie, standing here telling him this news instead of handling it through lawyers and intermediaries. She looked terrified beneath her composure, and Owen recognized that fear. He'd felt it when the nurse first placed Harper in his arms, that overwhelming sense of being inadequate for the task ahead. He asked Valerie what she wanted to do. She said she wanted to keep the baby. She wanted to try, but she didn't know how to be a mother, had no template for that kind of love. Her own childhood had been boarding schools and nannies and parents too busy building empires to build relationships. Owen told her the truth. Nobody knew how to be a parent until they did it. You learn by doing, by failing, by loving someone more than you loved your own comfort. Valerie asked if his offer still stood, if he'd really be willing to co-parent with her despite their vastly different circumstances. Owen thought about it seriously, about Harper gaining a half-sibling, about the complications and the judgment and the sheer improbability of making this work. Then he thought about that empty penthouse and the loneliness in Valerie's eyes, and the child who deserved better than being raised by parents in separate worlds. He told her yes, but on one condition. They needed to actually know each other, not as CEO and mailroom clerk, but as two people trying to raise a child together. They needed to build something real. Valerie studied him for a long moment, then agreed. They exchanged phone numbers, real ones, not going through assistants or corporate directories. It felt like signing a treaty between warring nations, awkward, informal, and desperately hopeful. Their first official meeting outside of work happened at a coffee shop halfway between their neighborhoods. Valerie arrived in jeans and a sweater, looking younger without her corporate uniform. Owen brought Harper, who'd been briefed that Daddy's friend needed help learning about kids. Harper took to the mission with 6-year-old enthusiasm, explaining the intricacies of playground politics and the correct way to make a peanut butter sandwich. Valerie listened like Harper was presenting a business proposal, asking thoughtful questions and taking mental notes. Owen watched these two people from different planets communicate and felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. Maybe this impossible thing could work. They started meeting regularly, always in neutral locations, always with Harper as a buffer against awkwardness. Valerie learned to navigate Chuck E. Cheese and children's museums, places she'd never set foot in before. She was clumsy at first, uncertain how to respond when Harper grabbed her hand or asked for help reaching something. But she tried, and her trying mattered more than her initial failures. Harper, with a child's gift for cutting through pretense, decided that Valerie was nice because she never talked down to her and always remembered what Harper had said in previous conversations. Owen saw Valerie slowly shedding layers of corporate polish, revealing someone softer underneath. Someone who laughed at Harper's terrible knock-knock jokes and didn't mind getting ice cream on her expensive sweater. One evening, Valerie invited them to her penthouse for dinner. She'd insisted on cooking herself, a revelation that shocked Owen until he saw her kitchen, which looked barely used. Harper explored the apartment with wide eyes, declaring it looked like a princess castle. Valerie attempted spaghetti, which came out slightly overdone, the sauce from a jar but warmed with effort. They sat at her dining table that probably seated 12, just the three of them at one end, and it felt less empty than it had before. Harper chatted about her day while Valerie served salad with careful attention. Owen helped clean up while Harper watched a movie, and he found himself standing beside Valerie at the sink, their hands occasionally brushing in the soapy water. She apologized for the meal being simple. Owen told her it was perfect and meant it. Perfection wasn't about the food, it was about the trying, the showing up, the building of something new from nothing. As Valerie's pregnancy progressed, she began showing up at Owen's apartment in the evenings after work. His place was tiny compared to her penthouse, a two-bedroom in a neighborhood where kids played in the streets and neighbors knew each other's names. But Valerie seemed to prefer it here, where Harper's artwork covered the refrigerator and toys lived scattered across the living room floor. She'd sit on the worn couch while Owen made dinner. Harper cuddled beside her, showing her picture books. Owen taught Valerie to make his specialty, chicken tacos, and she approached the recipe with the same intensity she probably brought to corporate strategy. She was terrible at it initially, but she kept trying, and by her fifth attempt, they were actually edible. One night, after Harper had gone to bed, Valerie and Owen sat on his small balcony sharing a pot of herbal tea. The night air was cool, and the city hummed its constant background song. Valerie's hand rested on her growing belly, and Owen found himself asking the question he'd been avoiding. Why had she been so desperate that night at the party? What had driven her to the edge of that particular cliff? Valerie was quiet for a long time, her gaze fixed on the middle distance. When she finally spoke, her voice was stripped of its usual certainty. She told him about her marriage, about her ex-husband, a man as ambitious and cold as she'd thought she was, about getting pregnant and feeling something wake up in her that she'd thought was dead, some capacity for love and softness. She'd been 6 months along when she discovered her husband's affair with his assistant. The confrontation had been brutal, his words designed to wound. He didn't want the child, had never wanted it, had only agreed to placate her. He told her she'd be a terrible mother, too selfish and ambitious to nurture anything. The stress and shock had triggered early labor. She'd lost the baby that night, a daughter she'd already named and loved. Her husband had filed for divorce while she was still in the hospital, as if her grief was an inconvenience he couldn't be bothered to endure. Valerie's voice cracked as she described leaving that hospital with empty arm and an emptier heart. She'd thrown herself into work, building walls so high nothing could hurt her again. Until that company party, when the champagne and exhaustion had crumbled her defenses, and all that buried grief had come flooding out. Owen sat in stunned silence, understanding finally clicking into place. This wasn't about him or some impulsive mistake. This was about a second chance at something that had been stolen from her. He reached across the small table and took her hand, her fingers cold despite the warm night. He told her about his own marriage dissolution, about his ex-wife who'd decided motherhood wasn't for her weeks after Harper was born. She'd left the hospital, signed the divorce papers, and disappeared into a new life. Owen had been terrified, a young man suddenly solely responsible for a tiny human who couldn't even hold her own head up. He'd learned through trial and error and many failures. He'd learned that loving someone meant showing up even when you were exhausted, even when you didn't know what you were doing. He told Valerie she'd be a good mother because she wanted it enough to be terrified of failing at it. Valerie's eyes glistened with unshed tears. She asked him why he was being so kind to her when she'd used him, when she'd reduced him to a means to an end. Owen shook his head. He told her they'd used each other that night, both seeking something they needed desperately. But what they were building now was different. It was real and complicated and worth the effort. Valerie squeezed his hand, and they sat there in comfortable silence. Two damaged people learning to trust again. The baby kicked, strong enough that Owen could feel it through Valerie's skin, and they both laughed at the impossibility and the miracle of it all. In that moment, on Owen's cramped balcony overlooking a modest neighborhood, something shifted between them. It wasn't romance, not yet, but it was partnership. It was the foundation of something that might eventually become family. The weeks rolled forward, autumn giving way to early winter. Valerie attended Harper's school play, sitting in the audience beside Owen, while his daughter played a singing tree in a production so chaotic it was charming. Valerie applauded loudest when Harper took her bow, and afterward, she bought flowers for Harper from the lobby vendor. Harper declared it the best day ever and insisted Valerie come to dinner to celebrate. They ordered pizza and ate it on the living room floor because the table was covered in Harper's homework. Valerie, visibly pregnant now and beginning to show, sat cross-legged on the carpet, looking more relaxed than Owen had ever seen her. Harper fell asleep between them during the movie, and Owen carried her to bed. When he returned, Valerie was still there, a soft smile on her face. She told him she was starting to understand what she'd been missing all these years. Owen began accompanying Valerie to her prenatal appointments, sitting in waiting rooms filled with couples and trying not to notice the curious looks they attracted. The doctor was professional but clearly puzzled by their arrangement. Valerie always introduced Owen as the father, and he always confirmed it with a nod. They watched ultrasounds together, seeing their daughter's tiny features become more defined with each visit. Yes, another girl. Valerie had cried when the technician revealed the gender, happy tears this time, a chance to redo what had been taken from her. She asked Owen's opinion on names, and they debated options in the car ride home, disagreeing on most but enjoying the discussion. Eventually they settled on Iris, a name that meant rainbow, a promise of beauty after the storm. The turning point came during a particularly difficult week at Lancaster Industries. A merger Valerie had spent months orchestrating was falling apart, and she spent long hours at the office trying to save it. Owen brought her dinner each evening, warm containers of real food to replace the cold sandwiches she subsisted on. He'd stay for an hour, keeping her company while she worked, sometimes helping organize documents or just providing a human presence in her sterile office. On one night, exhausted, hormonal, and overwhelmed, Valerie broke down crying at her desk. She told Owen she couldn't do this, couldn't be a CEO and a mother, couldn't be good at both. She was failing already, and the baby wasn't even born yet. Owen pulled her into his arms and let her cry, his hand rubbing circles on her back like he did for Harper during nightmares. He told her something his own mother had once said: "You can't do everything, but you can do what matters." Valerie needed to decide what mattered most. She was quiet for a long time, and then she made a call that shocked everyone who knew her. She informed the board she was stepping back from CEO to chairman, effective immediately. She'd remain involved in major decisions, but would no longer handle day-to-day operations. The business world exploded with speculation. Valerie Lancaster, the woman who'd once declared her company was her child, was choosing differently. Owen understood the magnitude of her decision, the identity she was shedding, the terrifying leap into uncertainty. That night, back at his apartment, she told him she was scared. Owen told her being scared meant she was doing something real, but peace was short-lived. Photos appeared online and in business tabloids. Valerie and Owen at a cafe, his hand on her pregnant belly. Valerie and Harper at the park, looking every bit like mother and daughter. The headlines were savage and predictable. CEO steps down for secret affair with employee. Lancaster's baby daddy, a mailroom clerk. From boardroom to bedroom. Valerie Lancaster's shocking downfall. The articles painted Owen as either a gold digger or a naive pawn. They painted Valerie as desperate or delusional. The comment sections were vicious, dissecting their age difference, their class difference, the impropriety of their relationship. Owen's phone exploded with calls from people he hadn't spoken to in years, vultures circling for inside information. The attention affected Harper first. Kids at school repeated things their parents had said, questions about her daddy and the rich lady. Harper came home crying, asking Owen if he was in trouble, if they'd have to move. Owen held her and promised everything would be okay, though he wasn't sure it would be. Valerie called him that evening, her voice tight with fury and guilt. Her ex-husband had given an interview, his face a mask of false concern, as he expressed worry for Valerie's mental state. He implied she'd never recovered from losing their child, suggested she was using Owen and this pregnancy as a replacement for what she'd lost. He positioned himself as the reasonable party, the man who tried to help her but had been pushed away. The performance was masterful and devastating. Valerie wanted to sue him, to fight back with lawyers and public relations firms, but Owen suggested something different. He suggested they tell the truth, their truth, without filters or spin. Valerie was skeptical, but Owen reminded her that lies lived in darkness. Truth could survive daylight. They crafted a statement together, sitting at Owen's kitchen table while Harper did homework nearby. They didn't justify or defend. They simply stated facts. They'd met under difficult circumstances. They were expecting a child together. They were building a co-parenting relationship based on respect and their child's well-being. They acknowledged their different backgrounds but refused to apologize for them. They asked for privacy but didn't expect it. The statement was honest and vulnerable and completely unlike anything a PR professional would have written. The response was mixed. Some people admired their candor, others doubled down on criticism. But something unexpected happened. Other single parents began sharing their stories in the comments, tales of unconventional families that worked through love rather than traditional structures. Working-class people tired of rich people drama found themselves rooting for Owen. Women who'd faced similar judgment as Valerie sent messages of support. The narrative began to shift slowly from scandal to human interest story. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Owen and Valerie decided to ignore the rest of the noise and focus on what mattered, preparing for Iris and protecting Harper. The board of Lancaster Industries called an emergency meeting. Several members wanted Valerie removed entirely, citing the scandal as damaging to the company's reputation. Valerie attended, 7 months pregnant and radiating a calm certainty she'd never possessed in all her years of cutthroat business dealings. She told them they were welcome to try removing her, but she owned controlling interest and had broken no laws or corporate policies. Her personal life was personal. If the board couldn't separate her effectiveness as chairman from their pearl-clutching about her private choices, perhaps they were the ones unfit for their positions. The room fell silent. Valerie had always been formidable, but this was different. This was someone who'd stopped performing and started living. The vote to remove her failed. Several board members quietly resigned in protest, and Valerie replaced them with people who understood that competence mattered more than conformity. Owen faced his own challenges at work. The mailroom supervisor called him in, uncomfortable and apologetic. Corporate had received complaints about the appearance of impropriety, concerns that Owen might be benefiting from his relationship with the board member. Owen understood what wasn't being said. They wanted him gone to make the problem disappear. He cleaned out his locker that afternoon, years of employment ending with a handshake and a severance check that felt like hush money. Harper cried when he told her he'd lost his job. Owen assured her they'd be fine, that sometimes endings created space for new beginnings. He tried to believe his own words. Valerie was furious when she learned of his termination. She wanted to fight it, to use her influence to get him reinstated, but Owen asked her not to. It would only fuel the narrative that he was using her. Besides, he'd been thinking about a change. He'd been sorting mail for years because it was stable and safe. But maybe it was time to be brave. He'd once dreamed of becoming a teacher, had even completed 2 years of education courses before dropping out when his ex-wife left. Maybe he could finish his degree. Maybe he could build something for himself instead of just surviving. Valerie listened, then made a suggestion. She had connections at the state university, could probably secure him a scholarship if he was serious. Owen's pride bristled at accepting help, but Valerie pointed out that co-parenting meant supporting each other's growth. If he wanted to be a teacher, she'd help make it happen, not as charity, but as investment in the man who'd be raising their daughter. The last trimester brought them closer, out of necessity and choice. Valerie experienced complications that required bed rest, and her penthouse felt like a prison. She asked if she could stay at Owen's apartment, where Harper's energy and noise would keep her sane. Owen agreed, and suddenly his small space held 3 people and a baby on the way. They created new routines. Owen would wake early to make breakfast while Valerie slept in, Harper learning to be quiet in the mornings. Afternoons, Harper would lie beside Valerie on the couch, reading her stories or showing her drawings. Evenings, Owen cooked dinner while Valerie and Harper set the table. A domestic tableau that felt more real than anything in Valerie's expensive, empty penthouse. Harper began calling Valerie by her first name, but the affection was obvious. She rested her head on Valerie's shoulder during movies, would bring her water without being asked, would gently touch Valerie's belly, and talk to her baby sister. Valerie blossomed under this simple, constant love. She learned that being needed didn't require grand gestures or perfect performance. It required showing up day after day, in all your imperfect humanity. Owen watched his daughter and the mother of his unborn child bond, and something in his heart that had been closed for years began to open. He found himself noticing things about Valerie, the way she laughed at Harper's jokes, really laughed, not the polite chuckle she'd once deployed in board meetings, the way she'd absently reach for his hand during evening news, the way she looked in the morning, face bare of makeup, hair messy, more beautiful than any corporate photograph. One night after Harper had gone to bed, Owen and Valerie sat on the couch, her feet in his lap as he rubbed them, a habit he'd developed as her ankles swelled. She asked him something that had clearly been weighing on her mind. Did he ever regret it? That night at the party? Everything that had happened since? Owen considered the question seriously. His life had been simpler before, lonelier but more predictable. Now it was complicated and public and uncertain. But he looked at Valerie, at the life they'd created, literally and figuratively, and he told her the truth. He didn't regret it. Not the chaos, not the judgment, not any of it, because it had led to this, a family forming in real time, messy and unconventional, but more honest than anything he'd had before. Valerie's eyes filled with tears, and she admitted she'd been falling in love with him, not with the idea of him or what he represented, but with the man who'd taught her that strength could be gentle and love could be patient. Owen kissed her then, soft and careful, a promise rather than a demand. They'd been building toward this moment for months, and it felt right in a way their first night together hadn't. This wasn't desperation or alcohol or filling a void. This was choosing each other with clear eyes and full hearts. They made love slowly, mindful of Valerie's pregnancy, their intimacy deepened by everything they'd learned and survived together. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Owen's bed, and Valerie whispered that she wanted this to be real. Not just co-parenting, but partnership. Not just friendship, but family. Owen agreed, and they fell asleep holding each other, the sound of Harper's soft breathing drifting from the next room, a lullaby of the life they were creating. Iris arrived early on a morning when Valerie's water broke while Owen was dropping Harper at school. He raced back to find Valerie calm and prepared, her hospital bag already by the door, breathing through contractions with the same focused intensity she'd once brought to hostile takeovers. They called Harper's school to arrange for her to stay with a friend. The drive to the hospital was tense but punctuated by moments of absurd humor, Valerie making dark jokes about timing and Owen's terrible driving. The labor was long and difficult. Valerie, who'd faced down corporate sharks without flinching, sobbed through the pain and gripped Owen's hand hard enough to leave bruises. He coached her breathing, wiped her forehead, told her she was strong enough to do this. When complications arose and doctors mentioned a possible C-section, Valerie panicked, remembering her last delivery that had ended in loss. Owen pulled her back from the edge of fear, his voice steady in the chaos. He reminded her that this time was different. This time she wasn't alone. This time she had him and Harper waiting to meet Iris. This time she was surrounded by love instead of betrayal. Valerie found her center, dug deep, and pushed through the terror and the pain. When Iris finally emerged wailing and perfect, the doctor placed her on Valerie's chest, and the sound Valerie made was something between a laugh and a sob. She looked at Owen with wonder and gratitude, and he looked back with pride and love. Their daughter was here. Their family was complete. Owen cut the umbilical cord with shaking hands, this physical severing that paradoxically bound them all together more tightly than before. They brought Iris home to Owen's apartment, which suddenly felt too small for their growing family. Harper was besotted with her baby sister, wanting to hold her constantly, to sing to her, to help with every feeding and diaper change. Valerie navigated new motherhood with the same determination she'd brought to everything else, though she was gentler with herself now when she struggled. Owen had taken time off from his newly resumed studies to help, and their days blurred into a haze of feedings, sleep deprivation, and moments of transcendent joy. At night, feeding Iris while Harper and Valerie slept, Owen would look at his two daughters and the woman he loved, and the impossibility of it all would hit him fresh. He'd been invisible before. Now he was the center of someone's universe. Three someones, actually. The media attention faded as new scandals emerged to capture public imagination. Occasionally, a tabloid would run a "Where Are They Now" piece, always surprised to report that Owen and Valerie were still together, still making it work. Valerie had been right to step back from daily corporate operations. Her company thrived under new leadership while she focused on strategic direction and her family. She'd moved out of her penthouse, couldn't stand the place anymore after experiencing real home in Owen's cramped apartment. They'd bought a house together in a neighborhood that split the difference between their worlds. A place with a yard for Harper and enough space that they weren't constantly tripping over each other. It wasn't grand, but it was theirs. Owen completed his degree and began a student teaching at Harper's school. The kids loved him because he understood them, remembered what it felt like to be small and uncertain. He'd never be wealthy, would never move in Valerie's old social circles, but he'd found something more valuable: purpose beyond survival. Valerie joined the board of several nonprofits focused on single parents and maternal health, using her business acumen to actually help people rather than just increase shareholder value. She was better at it than she'd been at corporate warfare, more fulfilled by making a difference than making a fortune. They were building a life that looked nothing like either of them had imagined, and it was more beautiful for its unpredictability. Harper's birthday party was held in their new backyard, a chaotic affair with kids from school and a few neighbors. Valerie wore jeans and a t-shirt splattered with cake frosting, holding one-year-old Iris on her hip while organizing relay races. Owen manned the grill, accepting compliments on his burgers from parents who'd once whispered about the scandal. As the sun set and the party wound down, the four of them sat on their porch steps, Harper between her parents, Iris drowsy in Valerie's arms. A neighbor walking past called out a greeting to the Carter Lancaster family, and it struck Owen that, yes, that's what they were. They'd created a hyphenated life, neither one subordinate to the other, both parts essential. That night, after the girls were asleep, Owen and Valerie sat in their living room, exhausted and happy. Valerie leaned against him, and they didn't need to speak to communicate. They'd been through fire and come out forged into something stronger. She'd taught him that he deserved more than invisibility, that his kindness was strength rather than weakness. He'd taught her that vulnerability wasn't failure, that love multiplied rather than divided, that family could be chosen as much as born. Neither of them was perfect. They still argued about discipline strategies and whether Iris needed another stuffed animal, but they'd learned to fight fair, to apologize sincerely, to choose each other even when it was hard. Owen thought back to that night in the ballroom, to the desperate question that had changed everything. "I want a baby, can you help?" He'd answered without understanding what he was agreeing to, but he understood now. Valerie hadn't just wanted genetic material or a means to an end. She'd wanted what everyone wants beneath the surface: connection, purpose, someone to matter to, and someone who matters back. Owen had given her that, and she'd given him the same. Two broken people had bumped into each other at their lowest moments and decided to build something together. It shouldn't have worked. By every logical measure, it should have been a disaster. But love, Owen had learned, didn't obey logic. It operated on faith and effort and the daily choice to stay, even when leaving would be easier. Valerie stirred against him, murmuring something about checking on Iris. Owen kissed the top of her head and told her Iris was fine, that they were all fine, that they could rest now. Valerie settled back against him, her breathing evening out as exhaustion claimed her. Owen looked around their lived-in living room, toys scattered across the floor, photographs of their blended family covering the walls, evidence of real life in every corner. This was what happy looked like. Not perfect or polished, not what anyone would have predicted, just real and messy and absolutely worth every difficult step it had taken to arrive here. Outside, the city hummed its constant song, indifferent to small miracles. But inside this house, four hearts beat in synchronized rhythm, a family that had chosen itself against all odds. The seasons changed, and so did they. Harper grew taller, losing baby teeth and gaining independence. Iris took her first steps, then her first words. Dada and Mama emerging in equal measure for both her parents. Valerie's ex-husband remarried and stopped giving interviews, his brief moment of relevance fading. The co-workers at Lancaster Industries who'd whispered about scandal now sent baby gifts and party invitations. Owen's mother visited from across the country, prepared to disapprove, but won over within an hour by Valerie's genuine warmth and obvious devotion to her grandchildren. The old woman pulled Owen aside and told him she was proud. that he'd built something real from nothing, that he'd become the man she'd always known he could be. Life wasn't easy. Money remained tight despite Valerie's wealth, a point of tension they navigated carefully. She wanted to help more than Owen's pride sometimes allowed. They compromised, finding middle ground where Valerie could contribute without Owen feeling diminished. His teaching salary wouldn't make them rich, but it was honest work that filled him with purpose. They learned to communicate through frustration, to assume good intentions even during arguments, to remember that they were on the same team even when they disagreed on tactics. Marriage became a possibility they discussed seriously, but they weren't in a hurry. They had already committed to the hardest parts. A ceremony felt like paperwork compared to what they had already survived together. On Iris's birthday, they gathered in their backyard again, this time with both sides of their unusual family represented. Owen's mother and brother, Valerie's small circle of true friends who'd stood by her through scandal, colleagues from Owen's school, and Valerie's current professional circle, Harper's friends from school, a motley crew that shouldn't have mixed but somehow did, united by their affection for the birthday girl and respect for the family that had formed around her. As Iris blew out her candles with enthusiastic help from Harper, cameras captured the moment. But unlike those tabloid photos from before, these images showed something the media had missed in their rush to judge: the simple beauty of people who loved each other choosing to stay. Later, as the party wound down and family helped clean up, Owen found Valerie sitting on the porch steps, watching Iris toddle after Harper in the grass. He sat beside her, their shoulders touching, a point of contact that had become their default. Valerie turned to him, and in her eyes, he saw the journey they traveled from that desperate night to this mundane, perfect afternoon. She thanked him, not for the first time, for answering her question honestly, for staying when any rational person would have run, for seeing her as human rather than headline. Owen took her hand and told her the truth. She'd saved him too. She'd reminded him that he was more than his circumstances, that he deserved partnership and passion, and a life beyond mere survival. They kissed there on the porch, unhurried and content, while their daughters played and family chatted in the background. It wasn't the kiss of new love, desperate and uncertain. It was the kiss of people who'd chosen each other every day and would keep choosing each other for all the days ahead. When they broke apart, Harper called for them to come play, and Iris echoed her sister with toddler enthusiasm. Owen and Valerie stood, hands still linked, and walked toward their daughters, toward the life they'd built from broken pieces in impossible circumstances. Behind them, the house stood solid and welcoming, no longer Owen's apartment or Valerie's penthouse, but theirs, a home in every sense of the word. The city had moved on to other stories, other scandals, other impossible romances to dissect and judge. But here, in this small backyard, in a middle-class neighborhood, something rare had survived. A family formed by choice and sustained by love. Valerie Lancaster had asked for help having a baby. Owen Carter had agreed to become a father. Neither of them had understood what they were really asking, what they were really offering. But in the beautiful chaos of the years that followed, they discovered something more valuable than the family they'd planned. They'd found the family they needed. And in the end, that made all the difference. The story of Valerie Lancaster and Owen Carter unveils a powerful lesson about the courage to embrace vulnerability and build connection from brokenness. Valerie, a formidable CEO, and Owen, an unassuming mailroom clerk, were worlds apart, yet a moment of raw desperation bridged their divide. Valerie's plea for a child and Owen's willingness to step into an unimaginable role teach us that love and family can emerge from the most unlikely circumstances when we choose compassion over judgment. Their journey, marked by scandal, sacrifice, and the slow forging of trust, shows that true strength lies in showing up, imperfectly but consistently, for those who need us. Valerie's transformation from a guarded executive to a devoted mother, and Owen's leap from invisibility to purpose, remind us that life's greatest rewards come from daring to rebuild after loss. Their story, woven with pain, hope, and the joy of their daughters, Harper and Iris, urges us to look beyond societal labels and embrace the messy, beautiful reality of human connection. No matter our past mistakes or the walls we've built, we can choose to create something meaningful by staying open to love and second chances. We'd love to know your thoughts. Has a moment of vulnerability ever led you to unexpected connection or growth? Share your experiences in the comments. We're inspired by every story. If this tale moved you, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to join our community of dreamers and storytellers. Your support keeps these heartfelt narratives alive. So let's continue this journey together. Subscribe now and let's celebrate the power of love and resilience.